Hi, my name's Carson, and I have with me tonight Kaden Love. Now, Kaden, you have written a couple. Well, you have one book out correct right now, and then you have a novella, and then you're working
Yep.
on the second book. So
Yeah.
the first book, Elegy of a Fragmented Vineyard. I love that title. The novella Beast Call, and then you're also working on Duet of a Pernicious Ills of Pernicious Ills. Correct?
Correct.
So, Caden, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and about your books.
Yeah. So I am a 25-year-old writer, even though I might look like 14 to some people. I'm from Utah, and that's where I'm currently living. And so, yeah, I wrote Elegy of a Fragmented Vineyard is the first of a planned trilogy in the Paladins of the Harvest series. Came out in January of this year, and book two, Duet of Pernicious Eels, is planned to be released in January of next year. And this is an epic fantasy that focuses on a magic system that revolves around organ transplants and how the morality of that goes into the policies and politics of the world. I'm really much inspired by Brandon Sanderson. So whenever I pitch it, I always tell people it's for fans of Brandon Sanderson that like epic fantasy. And there are a lot of really just unique elements that I think I bring to the table. So that's always my pitch. It's epic fantasy with an organ transplant based magic system.
Now, it's a very unique magic system, and I love unique magic systems. So I read on your bio that you wrote the first book while nursing school. So did that
Mhm.
play in the magic system? You're like, oh, this is kind of cool. How about we do this?
Yeah, I think it did. So yeah, that's currently my day job right now. I'm working as a nurse, and funny enough that I work in the endoscopy department, so gastrointestinal health, and that is the primary basis of this book. It is the idea of a third intestine next to the small bowel and the large bowel. And whenever I explain the nature of the book to people, a lot of people assume that it's science fiction because organ transplants are a very new thing, and people that know the body naturally rejects things that are foreign being transplanted into them. And so it's a very new science, but doing this in a medieval setting was a bit of a challenge. But I think that's where, where the magic system comes in. It's something that helps overcome an obstacle that would otherwise not be possible without it. And so people of a medical background or have a knowledge of some gastrointestinal health and organ transplants and how those work will kind of notice the little intricacies I put in there, um, just to show how it actually would function in a world like that. And definitely, because like I said, medicine was a lot on my mind. And the main character that you first meet, Fenmir, is a surgeon going into this. So, I am not a surgeon, but I knew what I needed to have this character know in a medieval time setting. And, worst comes to worst, it is my world. So I got to make the decisions with it.
Exactly. Do people also get the feeling of Frankenstein? Are they like, well, is it a horror book or something like that? Or
Yeah, and the funny thing is sometimes I'll look on the Amazon rankings of my book, and the one category where it tends to rank pretty high is dark fantasy horror.
oh,
And um I definitely would say, that it is a dark fantasy, but it is not dark and grim. It's not grim dark. It's a very hope-filled series about people just trying to do what is best, but there, are dark elements that come into there. And I, whenever I explain how the magic system works, people are either like, oh, wow, that's way too much for me, or they're really intrigued. And I think it's, for general fantasy people, if they learn a little more about it, they're going to love it because it isn't as dark and grim as it might seem, though there are definitely, light and dark moments as there are with most fantasy books.
right. No, it sounds fascinating. I've actually seen your book at Barnes and Noble
Uh-huh.
in Sandy. So next time I'm up there, I'm actually 5 hours away. So when I
Oh,
flew that, so
nice.
next time I'm up there, I'll have to pick it up. Um,
Hmm.
I've been wanting to for a while. I forgot to mention that you're on Instagram, Book Talk, and whatnot, and you post your favorite books and different challenges. You even relate to like if you like this type of movies, you like this type of anime and stuff like this. So like
Hmm.
you're very relatable on your Instagram posts. So yeah, I just forgot to mention that. So go ahead and tell people like how they can follow you if they want to on Instagram and whatever social medias they you have.
Yeah. So most of my social media is at Kaden Love Author, Kaden Love. But the one you're probably talking about is Svetling Press, Svetling Press. That is my Instagram, my Bookstagram, where I just post like lots of book content. Um, the reason I did that was because I did want to have one where I could have it more book focused, and my personal accounts now turned into more of like that professional author account. But at the same time, I've had this Instagram since I was a teenager, so I have a lot of it's old friends, family, things like that. That I was like, okay, if I want to succeed with a bookstagram, it requires very consistent posting. That's not something I wanted to bother everyone with. So kind of has the best of both worlds. If people want to just follow my author updates, me as a person, I've got Kaden Love Author. That is Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok as well. And TikTok's also where I post the same reels that I put on Svetling Press.
Fantastic. Yeah, they're lots of fun and they're very informative. You get
Mhm,
rankings and all the other stuff. So let's go back to the book. I read that you started it in nursing school. Okay. I work at a hospital as well, and I know how
mhm,
busy nursing school is.
mhm.
I'm not a nurse, but working in the hospital, the hospital will pay for nurses, and they always tell me how busy they are. How did you manage the time to do this during nursing school?
Uh-huh. So a lot of it was in gratitude. During nursing school, I did work from home, just at a call center. So random fun fact about me, I speak Slovenian. And so I did customer service in Slovenian. And while I was there, I was working at home. It is a slower market for the company I was working for, so I had a lot of downtime. Um, and that is, especially there were hard times in nursing school where studying was my number one priority. But as you can see now, where I am working as a full-time nurse, it is still such a high priority for writing. And it's just something I've always stuck to is just making sure that I learn how to prioritize things, learn how to make a good schedule. So, of course, I had to pass tests. I had to get sufficient knowledge for nursing, but the downtime where I would unwind and just kind of let my mind roam was a lot of writing. I am a runner, so I do most of my reading actually through audiobooks, even though now, outside of school especially, I try to get a couple of print books a month. But treating those now outside of school as those are my textbooks, just fantasy textbooks. And so always making sure just to prioritize it. So I do enjoy video games every now and then and certain, times where I can watch TV shows, but a lot of those have kind of fallen on the back burner because I can look and be like, okay, do I want to watch a movie that I kind of care about? It'd be interesting to see, or I can invest that hour and a half, 2 hours into a good writing session. And so that's honestly where a lot of it comes from. I think that everyone can make time for whatever they want. It's just depending on how you prioritize things.
So do you have certain goals that you want to hit every day, whether that's a specific block of time or word count?
Yeah, so I aim for 1,000 words a day on days where I work. On days where I don't, I try to hit 2,000, something like that. Currently, I am editing two of my books that I'm working on. But I always like to have drafting. I like to have something going. Just because self ed not I mean I do have a professional editor, but I mean like drafting other revising. That's a better word for it. Revising isn't my favorite thing. It's kind of hard to look through and like pick at your writing to show your little vulnerabilities. It's much more fun to just kind of let the ideas flow out. Um, so whereas now I don't have the necessary 1,000 words a day goal because I'm focused on revisions. I still like to have something working on the side, and that's kind of how I wrote Beast Call. While I was revising Elegy, I wanted to have something to kind of work down on the downtime in between periods where I get back from my editor. I just kind of let the ideas flow, and that's kind of what I'm working on now. It's just another novella set in the world.
Nice. And this is independently published, right?
Yeah, so this is all independently published. That's where I have most of my sales on Amazon. They're in a couple of bookstores. It's on Audible now. And I did my initial launch of LG with Kickstarter and had really good experience with that.
Nice. That's fantastic. No, as an independent author, like you are involved in everything, like picking your cover artist, which you kind of cheated, and we'll get into that in a second. Three, you have to find, or two, you have to find an editor, and then marketing and everything else, finding a narrator and stuff like that. So you have different
Mhm,
stages. So yeah, like you might not be able to hit that 1,000 or 2,000 word goal, but like you're in different stages of the process because you have to do it all. So
mhm.
let's go back to how you cheated. So cover artist. Tell the people about that. How you
So
found
the
your cover
cover
artist.
artist, um, you know, it might even sound more romantic to be like, oh, I got a cover artist and then married her. But no, my wife is my cover artist. And when we got married, she was in school for illustration. And funny enough, she didn't read. Like she would listen to audiobooks of self-help things like that. She's since become a very avid fantasy reader. And I think I kind of got her into that when she read my book, a lot of that to get ideas for how she wanted to do the cover, because she'd had some experience with a couple commissions for some smaller books, projects like that. And that is one of the biggest obstacles about self-publishing is that if you want a good cover, it is not cheap. And I was so fortunate to have my wife do it. And she did the cover for Beast Call. She did it for Duet of Pernicious Eels. And then she did all the little chapter headings, logos, things like that. And we've just made a really good team out of it.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Not everybody can be that lucky.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, it's one of the hardest things about self-publishing is that finding the fine line between, okay, where's my budget? How amazing do I want this to look? Because you could go spend, thousands to have the most amazing cover, but that's thousands of dollars, a lot invested. And I went into it just having a cover that I love and just had to be a good husband. And that's it.
That's awesome. So how did you find your editor and your narrator?
Yes. So my editor was another reason I was very, very fortunate. To give a little background, my editor is Sarah Chorn. If you know anything about other big independent books, names like Ryan Cahill, he is one of the largest self-published authors right now. She also edits for him. And there's a couple out there. Zach Argyle is another independently published author, and his wife, she has a booktube channel called Bookborn. They organize something called the Indie Fantasy Fund, where every year they will have people submit the first chapter of their novel, and they will pick winners for certain grants. And grants, like the last one was aimed at getting audiobooks for authors that have already been published. Other years it was just a certain amount of cash to go towards editing, cover art, whatever you wanted. Well, I won during a certain year uh, the free editing service from Sarah Chorn. So she just was on for my first book and really, really transformed it. She is an author herself, has really high accolades, and just is a very well-known author among independent authors. So known editor among independent authors. So to have free editing was amazing, but to have it by her was a dream come true. So that's how I found her. She enjoyed my work and did Beast Call. She is currently working on Duet, and those ones I of course had to pay for, but that's kind of how I just ended up with her, just fortune and good connections.
It sounds like a good resource for up and coming authors.
Oh
The
yeah, anyone that is looking to become self-published or just needs that kind of boost, definitely look into it. I think in the spring is usually when they do it, just the Indie Fantasy Fund is what it's called.
That's awesome. And then your narrator, you said it was on Audible now. Did
Yeah.
Who did you find for your narrator, and how'd you hook up with them?
So his name is Adriel Brandt. I had heard of a couple authors that used his stuff, so I listened to a little of their books after I found out about him. But for independently published authors that have their books on Amazon, it's actually very, very simple. There's a thing called ACX where you essentially have your little sample that you want to have read, and you can have people audition for it. So I had my book out there. People could look it up on Amazon, see whatever they wanted about it, the synopsis. And then I had a little sample that I wanted the people who would audition to read. Had a little bit from a male character, a little bit from a female character, just because I have both as point of view characters. I want to see a little bit of each. And had plenty of awesome people audition, but I really love Adriel's work, and he was very quick and efficient with it. And so after I got that 3-minute sample out of the initial auditions, then you get like a first 15 minutes. And after that, I just signed on with them. And he's been doing a couple other authors. Seeds of War is another one that some people out there that read indie might know that he did. And yeah, he was really good, had a great voice range, and it was just super fun going through and listening to my book being read by someone else. And for people like my wife that don't really like to read or are really busy but would otherwise like to while they're working and stuff, it was just a really great option. It's really helped my book kind of get out there more.
Awesome. That's amazing, and thanks for mentioning that ACX and everything like that, so that people that want to can look into that and get narration for their book. So you
Hmm.
said you launched on Kickstarter.
Hmm.
That's pretty brave, a debut novel. What were
Hmm.
some of the challenges with that, and how'd you market that?
Yeah, so a lot of it was just setting it all up. Um, Again, thanks to my wife for a lot of her digital skills and editing, things like that, because you need to make it look impressive. I enjoy Kickstarter. I love board games, so I'm really looking on there for board games all the time, as well as other books. There's a lot of times where you'll have authors or companies even just release really pretty editions of books. And so being able to be up there and compete with people like that, just to have your product seen, you need to make it look very nice. And then I think it was a lot of the challenges come down to figuring out pricing, how much it is for a paperback, hardcover, what little things I want to put in for stretch goals. So if I make enough money, what else do I need to put in there? Because you need to keep that motivation up for people to share it, for people to want to invest in it. And the biggest resource that I had was just reaching out to other authors that did it. A lot of them really just made it a focus that while the product is the center, you are also the center. So the video is, of course, showing what the book is, but it's a lot about showing why people they should invest in you. Because even though I had everything ready and a lot of the money that I raised from that went just directly towards editing book two, a lot of people use that as their general funding. If they are releasing a really nice leather bound copy of their book, they need to hit a certain mark. So a lot of the difficulty, I think, came from just being an entrepreneur in that sense. I'm not a company running this whole Kickstarter, but it was myself. I had to do fulfillment, shipping, and everything on my own. And it was just kind of like a really quick crash course where I had to figure things out. And it turned out really well in the end. But there's lots of things that I've learned that I think I'll probably do that with book two, just because I think it gives more of an incentive to buy. And like I said, even though I had all the funding beforehand, um, Kickstarter is very eye-catching. And in certain book communities, when a bunch of people back a certain project, everybody wants to get onto that, and everybody wants to buy whatever they're buying as well.
That's amazing. Like I said, that's very brave for a first book release to go on Kickstarter. But
Mhm.
congratulations on the success, and I hope book two goes well. You mentioned your wife didn't read fantasy kind of beforehand until she kind of read your books. It sounds like kind of that she kind of reads fantasy now. What after she reached out to you or talked to you about it, what did you recommend to her? Be like, you're gonna like this book to kind of get you in.
Mhm. So she really enjoys romance, and the way I got her in was I mentioned before that I really like Brandon Sanderson. He was a big inspiration. And so Yumi and the Nightmare Painter was one of his books that involves a romance. And so I got her into that. She also loves Harry Potter. So Name of the Wind just kind of had similar elements of that. And that I think is still her favorite one. But just there's a lot of books we really connect on, but I think a lot of it was the romance. She doesn't like the explicit adult romance, which I think is very big today. But YA romance, just fantasy romance, is just she just loves it. And that was one of the interesting challenges with my book for her is that we have like a middle-aged man on the cover, and she likes drawing a lot of just like girls and young people, and that's why primarily like a lot of markets that reach out for her are YA book covers. So it was an interesting challenge to get her to do that. But we've since just we read a lot together. Sometimes we'll read the same books on audiobook or like on road trips we'll put ones on. But I kind of figured out the things that she likes. And like I said, it was romance that kind of got her into there. There's a good romance in it, and it's fun and fantastical. She's down for it.
So, and I'm guessing you kind of grew up reading fantasy. Do you remember like your first gateway into fantasy?
Uh-huh. So, like I said, being from Utah, where Brandon Sanderson is from, I remember earlier on reading Mistborn, which is so funny to me now to see that Sanderson is like probably the biggest current author in fantasy. Because at that point, I remember people being like, "Oh yeah, he's a big published author, but he's local." Um, and so he just got me so into it, and so going through those, I loved them. And I'd read off and on as a kid, but there were certain times where I would just fixate on it. Harry Potter, of course, was just really big for me. Um, Lord of the Rings, I loved Narnia, things like that. But I think that Brandon Sanderson's works are the ones that really got me geared towards becoming an author.
That's amazing. No, and he's huge. Like I remember meeting him when Elantris came out back in the day. And when I interview people, if they're a certain age, I can kind of guess of like who influenced them. Like, if they're
Mhm.
kind of my age, it's kind of Lord of the Rings or John Carter or something like that. The younger generation, a little bit older than you, like if they're in their 30s, it's like Harry Potter or like Twilight. If you know,
Uh-huh.
but like it seems now if they're in their early 20s, it's one or two things. It's either Brandon Sanderson or Sarah J. Moss.
Hmm.
And so like it's just kind of interesting, like these giants really in the genre in different age periods have like influenced certain people, and it's kind of interesting to see like in the future maybe you're going to be one of those people and be like, oh yeah, it was Kaden Love that really got me into fantasy and really helped me towards my career in writing.
Hmm.
No, that's fantastic. So when you're going through your books, it's always a struggle, right? You have a first draft. How many edits do you usually do? How many passes do you do before you send it off to your editor?
Uh-huh. So Elegy was a little different than what I do now because it's funny to talk about Elegy first was twice as long. I tell people it was twice as long and twice as bad. Um, I chopped out so much. I changed a lot. The dialogue was very, very purple, trying to impress. But I am very happy with the book that I have now. Um, with that one, I had a first draft, second draft where I kind of went through, read, made little edits, and then A good sign for me knowing that it needed a lot of work was that I wasn't having a lot of the early readers finish it. And the few people that did had some good feedback. And after I polished it up a little more and sent it to my editor, we actually even stopped kind of maybe like halfway through. And she's like, okay, we've made some good edits, but now you see kind of what you need to do. Go and do another draft through the beginning, and then we'll come back. And it was painful. I'm not going to lie. Like it was hard to just go and be like, because I'm like, oh, I'm so close. And I had to delay the release um, from late fall to January. But I was so glad that I did. And now I can just much more confidently, I'll go through a draft myself. I will go right into a second one where I just read through slowly. Sometimes I'll try to do a little out loud just because you can hear the little awkward phrasing. And then I'll send it to beta readers. I had a good amount of beta readers finish Duet of Pernicious Eels, and they loved it. I think most of them loved it more than book one, which is a good sign for me that I knew that it was almost ready. And so I took their feedback, implemented it, and got it basically 3 drafts in, and then sent it to my editor. And so there are different points where it's very transformative. I would say draft one to draft two is a big change. And maybe my editor will want me to make some big change in the future, but usually it's that 1 to 2 really big change. 3 was minor changes. Editing, that 4th one is going to be a big amount. And then I'll give it to some initial proofreaders, and that's just going to be tweaking little bits of grammar, things that I might have missed. Maybe I added like a paragraph because my editor told me to and misspelled something there. So maybe around 4 to 5 in total.
Perfect. And I like to ask that question so that people that begin their journey can kind of have an expectation. Like I'm a perfectionist, and so like it's really hard when I'm writing to like not to fiddle with it. Like just get it on the paper, and then later on I can fix that stuff. And
Hmm.
that when the editor came back to you and said you need to do one more pass and like had a whole bunch of stuff, it kind of reminded me of I don't know if you know who Peter V. Brett is.
Hmm.
Wrote the Word Man. He had to change or like cut like 80% of his words and kind of start over. And you don't want to experience that as a writer, but that always makes you a better writer. It
Yeah,
might be a
completely
hard
agree.
blow at first, but
Hmm.
if you stick to it. So what kind of motivated you to keep going after like, first second you're like, "Oh my gosh, like I've gone through this so much." Like what kept you motivated?
Uh-huh. I think a lot of it was just seeing that end point. So I did it. I I guess marketing is kind of what you could say. I started making my presence known on Twitter um, around the summer before release, and that's when I did my cover reveal when I had a good amount of some people noticing me, and that really gained a lot of traction. I had the pitch of what the book was about, I had the cover, and so people were invested. People were excited to read that story, and even though they hadn't read it, knowing people believed in me at such an early stage was really big motivation. Um, and I think that that's one of the coolest things about self-publishing for me was that I always knew what I was doing was going to be released. I knew that people are going to read it eventually, rather than, going through agents and maybe having this book be queried for 10 years and never seeing eyes. What was the purpose in writing any? And maybe there will be some point where I do try to have some books traditionally published. I think going indie and traditional both at the same time would be something fun. But I can always spring back if there aren't agents or companies that are really eager to publish my work. I can do it, and I've had a good enough following. And I think that that is just the biggest motivation is that I love the storytelling. I love getting that out there. So it's like something that I've created, and then being able to show it off. Um, in I guess not a really prideful way, but just having people to see this world that I've created. I think that's one of the greatest things about books is that It's such an amazing experience that we humans can have in our minds where, movies are enjoyable to watch, but you think of how many people go into creating this, whereas like an author can create all of that, put it just on paper, and to give someone that vision was such a cool idea to me, that to do that and have people go and enjoy the things that I wrote, be surprised by the little shocking things in there, think my world is cool, or enjoy the lessons that I've kind of trickled throughout there. It was the reason to keep going.
Awesome. And that's a great tip for people who are beginning the journey. Like you started getting online, getting a social media presence before the book came out. Able to do those teasers with the cover and, talking about your book and getting that following. Um, so if you are preparing to, come out with a book or you're writing a book, start newsletter, start, Instagram or TikTok or whatever to get that following so that when it comes out, I'm sure that also helped with your Kickstarter as well.
Oh, completely. I don't think I would have had anything without that. And Twitter was really great because initially what I did was just read books and then talk about them that I liked. And a lot of those books that I read were independently published. And so when I'd share my love on there, I just made good connections with other people that are were trying to do what I now am. And people, if you're a positive force, they're just willing to do the same for you and uplift you and share your work. That's one of the cool things I think about writing is that while the market itself can be competitive, like no authors are ever competitive because that's the thing. If someone buys my book, it doesn't mean they're not going to buy my friend's book because they're going to read their book and move right on to another one. So why not be mine? Why not be someone else's?
Right. We can see behind both me and you a ton of
Hmm.
books behind us because we love to read and we have a certain type of book that we like to read. And if it's good, we're going to read it. Um,
Hmm.
what, well, who have been some of your surprise reads that for independent authors that you didn't realize or didn't think it was going to be as good just looking at the cover and like it blew you away?
Hmm. Uh, there are a lot. Like I mentioned earlier, Zach Argyle is an author that I just love his work so much. It is on the same level as Mistborn for me, and that was the first series that really clicked for me, showing how amazing independent fantasy can be. That it's no longer what it might have been years ago. That independent publishing is what you do if you can't get published traditionally. It's just a different form. I really love that, and like I mentioned, Ryan Cahill, his covers are very basic, and that's nothing against him. They're usually just kind of black with a symbol on the front, which is a pretty common thing in a lot of fantasy. But the world building that he does is just spectacular, and it's just made me very eager to go out and try other people's books. And I won't lie in saying that if there is a very poor looking cover out there, there's a very low chance that I'll be interested in picking it up. Um, but it doesn't need to be the most stellar thing ever. If there's a little bit of interesting stuff there, I am down to try it. And having made a ton of author friends, I've read so many books out there, and just it's really interesting to meet someone and then read their book and be like, wow, like this is just seemed like a simple person, a normal friend, and they are so talented. And it kind of makes me feel validated. There are times where I can feel doubtful of myself because I feel like I'm just a person, and to see these people that are very much just normal humans creating wonderful things that are on the same level as all the books that I enjoy to read that have just been traditionally published.
Yeah, well, those doubts are normal, right? Like you always have,
Hmm.
that imposter syndrome. I remember
Hmm.
when Firefight came out, Brandon Sanderson's Firefight, like I was at a signing and I asked him, do you ever just get halfway through a book and just like think you're awesome, you're horrible, like this is just a bad book? And he said, yeah, but I talked to my wife and I talked to his agent and some of his friends, and they're just like, just get over it, you're an idiot, like just keep going. Like so
Hmm.
even and at that time, like Brandon Sanderson was pretty successful. I mean, it wasn't as successful as he is now, but he was still pretty successful. So like even at that point, like, he still had those doubts. So it's pretty common for everybody.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, it's just
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
You can
Yeah,
go.
it's just reassuring to see that, even the greats, the biggest authors are just kind of feeling the same where and if there is a book that I write or something that isn't that great, I don't have, I can always go and correct it. And even if a book is released and it's not my best, you can always write more.
Yeah, and with the being independently published, like you can take it off, fix it, and then put it back on. Whereas traditionally published, you can't as easily.
Yeah. Hmm.
So that's one of
Exactly.
the advantages. And like you said, independently published books, the quality is so great that um, even some traditionally published authors are going that route. They've either paused or doing a hybrid thing like you talked about. When I interviewed David Farland, who, if a lot of you don't know, he taught Brandon Sanderson in college about writing. His David Farland's his pen name. Dave Wolverton is his real name. But I asked him in the interview, it might have been afterwards, if you were starting your career today, uh, would you go the traditional route or would you go indie? And he goes, I would go indie 100%.
Hmm.
So it's
It's
kind of
really cool.
crazy. Yeah. And he was traditionally published, very successful Rune Lord book. So if you haven't checked that out, you should.
Yeah, I'll have to.
Um, so we talked about a lot about authors. I want you to do a Mount Rushmore of your four favorite authors. Like who do you think is like the most influential on you?
Hmm.
And you already
So
mentioned Brandon.
Brandon's definitely up there. For me, George R. R. Martin. Even though all the stuff in A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones isn't my favorite, just the politicking he did is really very foundational for my work. Because I really enjoy, just as a reader, much more the political machinations, all the secrets and things like that, rather than just bloody battlefields. I think that it's so interesting to have these characters go and do things. So people like Tyrion Lannister are just some of my favorite characters ever, because you just get to see the mental battles they gauge. And besides that, Steven Erickson, actually more of a recent favorite of mine. Just the lore, the genius that he has put in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. Um, it it's just been so great. And out of all the book series that I felt like I've learned and grown so much as an author is just reading those. Um, so the people that have read those, Memories of Ice was definitely the most influential book for me for Duet of Pernicious Eels. Some of the choices he made, just the vastness of it. I really love complex things. I love to feel like there's always more to learn out there. And that's something he did with the series. A lot of people are very quick to put it down because you're just thrown right into it. It is very difficult compared to a lot of fantasy. Um, and I feel like I'm working while I'm reading it. It's just so great. Um, Besides that, there are honestly so many, but one that I really love is Pierce Brown, the author of the Red Rising series, just because of the way that he does characters. And I am such a sucker for twists and things like that. And some of the things that he did in the first trilogy of his Red Rising series just blew me away. And the way that he did sci-fi in kind of more than just, the starships and aliens being so human focused and definitely having fantasy elements, just one of my favorite series. And the way that he, like I said, just shocks readers really inspired me.
That's fantastic. So, do you have any tips or tricks for new wannabe writers or authors?
Yeah, I think consistency is definitely the number one key. Um, Stephen King, in his book on writing, just said, that he can give you so many tips, but the core of it is reading a lot and writing a lot. So it's always so odd to me when I meet people that are like, "Oh yeah, I want to write a book," but it's like, "Oh, do you read a lot?" And they're like, "Yeah, I don't really read." You have to read. You have to. and you can learn as much as you can from good books as you can from bad books. Um, just being familiar with the format of storytelling in any way, shape, or form, and then just really working at it. People are always, when they meet me and say that, like, figure out that I wrote a book, they're very impressed because they're like, wow, that's a lot of dedication to go down and write. And like, I still just sit down sometimes and look at the books that I wrote and seeing that, there's hundreds of pages there that have just come from me sitting at a computer typing. And it is not something that is accomplished in one day. And it is difficult sometimes just to look out. I feel like I'm a pretty impatient person sometimes. So I just kind of want the story out there right away. But to look back and be like, wow, just doing simple habits, 1,000 words a day, whether it's more or less for certain people, produce this product. So the bare essence of just doing that. And to recognize that there's no single way to do it. You might be a person that writes, 100 pages of outline for your book, or you could be someone that keeps a document of notes open, kind of like I do, just for filling things out as you go. And besides that, especially for indie marketing, I think if you are going to try to be independently published, I think the biggest thing that you can do to get your book and name out there is, like I said, to read other independently published books, talk about how much you love them, and just be a friend to other authors, and things will work out for you.
That's great advice. Go ahead and tell people again how they can get a hold of you. Also, I saw on your website that you give out Beast Call if they're signed
Mhm.
up to your newsletter.
Yep.
So go ahead and tell them your website and tell them how they can get a hold of you if they want to.
Yeah, my website is kadenrlove.com, KADENRLOVE.com. On the front page, you'll see a link to click and download Beast Call by joining my newsletter. There's a little links tab that links to all my social media, but like I said, it's on X, I guess now, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Kaden Love Author, or you can follow my Bookstagram, which is Svetling Press, Svetling Press. And DM me, whatever. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
And Kickstarter coming in January or February.
Yep, that's the plan.
Awesome. So be on the lookout for that. Are you going to any conventions that you're going to be selling your books or doing any signings anytime soon? Or
Yeah,
actually through 2025?
so I will have a booth at the Dragonsteel convention in Salt Lake City. I will be at the booth on the Thursday, so the first day of the convention, selling books. The other days, I'm just going to be enjoying the convention, and then we'll see where I end up next. I got a couple local signings, but that is the next planned convention.
Perfect. Well, Caden, I appreciate you taking time out of your night to get on with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Troy Podcast. Please subscribe, like, and share with your friends.